Welcome to another episode of Punk Rock Politics with John Smith. This is my second video of a series I'm doing. Andrew Cuomo is the worst, should not be president or governor, and should probably be in prison. This is part 2. Okay. Now, let's see here. Pull up the article. I'm wearing my Lagwagon punk rock t-shirt. Lagwagon's awesome. You should check them out. The lead singer also had a band called Bad Astronaut. Awesome band, bunch of great albums. And Lagwagon's awesome. I believe some guys in the band, the other guys in the band also have other bands too. And the guy from Lagwagon was also in Me First and the Gimme Gimmes with the guy from NoFX, the singer of Swinging Utters and other bands. And I forget where the drummer's from. Sorry, dude. Anyway, I'll show you the back real quick, and then we'll get into this very lengthy article excoriating Andrew Cuomo for how terrible he is. This is to all my friends. Kind of a Nixon-esque character there. And I've decided that the video I did on my birthday, which was April 22nd, Earth Day, that I never ended up releasing, is like the part 1 video, but a lot different. I give different commentary and talk about different things and start reading this article. I'm just going to release it just for patrons only. So become a patron today for exclusive content. It was a different style video. There's some cool things in there I think you're going to enjoy. Some funny intro and stuff. So yeah, this is an amazing article. It's very long, but it's very worth reading. So we're going to read through it, and then we're going to discuss with any time we have, if we have any time. It might take me the whole video just to get through this. Please go to patreon.com/punkrockpolitics and become a patron today. Memberships start as low as just $1 for extra perks that only patrons get. And there's one for $2.70. Got to change the name though. I believe one for $7, then $10, and then $27. I give away so many more perks and options. As soon as I start getting some patrons, I'm going to put out loads of content. So if you don't know, that's Andrew Cuomo. And it says, stop trying to make Andrew Cuomo happen. You don't want him as president. You don't really want him as governor either. This is by Lita Gold. It was filed on the 27th of March, 2020 in The Virus, and it's a Current Affairs web exclusive. Here we go. I've lived in New York for 13 years, which makes this an eerily appropriate time to experience a plague. Some days I hide from the news entirely. On others, I watch the mounting infection rate with rising panic. It's over 23,000 in the city now, 37,000 in the state, and likely higher by the time this is published. This was, like I said, the 27th of March. On Sunday morning, I woke up at dawn to hit the grocery store in my Queens neighborhood just after it opened. This turned out to be a good idea. There were only a handful of other shoppers, and they were all sensibly masked. I wasn't masked because I didn't buy any protective gear, because by the time I thought about it 2 weeks ago, all the stores were already sold out everywhere. At one point, in the vegetable aisle, I thoughtlessly touched my face. This gave me a sort of low-level rolling panic for the rest of the day. I won't be going outside again for a while. But at least I live in New York, where our governor knows what he's doing. Stranger than the emergence of the novel coronavirus is the sudden flowering of praise for Andrew Cuomo, even as the state of New York experiences the largest outbreak anywhere in the country. In Jezebel, Rebecca Feinstein wrote, "Help, I think I'm in love with Andrew Cuomo," a joke/personal essay that should probably have remained an r/relationship fake post. Fishbein begins by describing her relatably lonely and scared and anxious state as the coronavirus rages everywhere. Then she realizes she's grown to rely on Andrew Cuomo's daily press briefings for comfort and reassurance. The tone of the piece is funny and confessional in typical Jezebel style. Fishbein acknowledges many of Cuomo's bad past policies, admits she probably has Stockholm Syndrome, and concludes, "As I sit alone in my apartment on the couch one of my roommates left behind, wondering when I can escape, if I'm already sick, if anyone will ever hug me again, if my 74-year-old father will survive this, only one thing is certain. Andrew Cuomo, dear leader, will take care of me. He loves me. He is the only one who is here for me. He will get me through this. And when I finally do, I will need an endless amount of anti-brainwash therapy so I can rightfully yell at him for using prison labor to make hand sanitizer." This is cute, and the terror that informs her feelings is perfectly understandable given the circumstances, but it also fucking sucks. Imagine saying in 1943 that when the war is over, you plan to rightfully yell at FDR for his Japanese internment camps. For all those who don't know, FDR was the president at that time. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He actually died in his 4th term. He had the most terms of any president, and since then you can only have 2. I'm not making the comparison lightly. Our prisons are a horror and a crime against humanity. Many prisons are locked up for crimes they didn't commit, and or for minor offenses they were plea bargained into rather than face longer sentences. These prisoners are disproportionately, by the way, many prisoners are locked up for crimes they didn't commit and or for minor offenses they were plea bargained into rather than face longer sentences. You could say that again. And just like a lot of what she's saying, and then following what she's about to say. These prisoners are disproportionately black because black people are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement. To make New York State's hand sanitizer, prisoners earn a thrilling 64 cents an hour, a penny less than the purported New York prison average of 65 cents an hour. Prisoners are not permitted to possess the hand sanitizer themselves because of its alcohol content. This measure has been condemned as slave labor, which it is, since the 13th Amendment bans slavery with the notable exception of convicted felons. And it sounds a lot like slavery if you ask the prisoners themselves. Katie Way of Vice spoke to her prisoner pseudonymously. This word is hard to say. I know what it means. This is weird saying it like this. Like pseudonym is just a fake name, but like pseudonymously. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Anyway, Katie Way of Vice spoke to a prisoner pseudonymously referred to as Michael, who claimed that the hand sanitizer operation runs 24 hours a day and 3 8-hour shifts, though some people work double shifts for more money. Getting 64 cents is actually really good, Michael said. I never got paid that much before doing any type of job like this. According to Michael, the work is exhausting. We're completely overworked. They treat us like shit. We don't really have too much time to do anything. No time at all. We literally, our complete day is booked all the way. On top of that, they aren't even making hand sanitizer at all. The prisoners are working all right and being paid 64 cents an hour to take existing hand sanitizer made by an unknown outside contractor, bottle it, and slap a NYS Clean logo on it. As Katie Way reports, neither NYSDOCCS, the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, nor the governor's office would respond to repeated questions about why the state would need to use prison labor to bottle hand sanitizer. Cuomo has insisted that his NYS Clean hand sanitizer is much cheaper to produce. He's never said why, but we all know why. Slave labor is cheap. But the hand sanitizer isn't even made by the prisoners, just bottled and labeled by them in what sounds like an unnecessarily elaborate operation. According to Vice, the governor's office didn't respond to questions about Cuomo's pitch that this was a cheaper, more effective option than bottling hand sanitizer outright. Yeah. Cuomo read Fishbein's piece and called her. You might have expected that she took the opportunity to rightfully yell at him for exploiting slave labor just so he can pretend to make cost-effective hand sanitizer in the middle of a pandemic, not to mention how he's kept the prisons open in the first place as coronavirus spikes through them. Alas, Fishbein was too overwhelmed. And it's funny, so it's not funny at all, but by keeping all these prisons open, right, you have guards and stuff, so no matter how you feel about it, like obviously all nonviolent criminals should be released, but like the criminals that you have in there, instead of being socially distant, and you have all these people for like minor offenses, they're the corrections officers or COs, and all the workers, healthcare workers, they're gonna be exposed to people who have the disease and can come back into communities when they leave work and spread it everywhere. So it's asinine that a lot of people aren't releasing at least all nonviolent prisoners and then like separating the violent ones or supposedly violent ones. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're not, but they've been convicted of being violent or whatever. You put them and you separate them further away, and you use the proper protection gear, PPE, and clean everything, and that's not what's happening. Anyway, alas, Fishbein was too overwhelmed. I did not ask a single substantive policy question, she writes. This is when she's talking to Cuomo after she wrote that article she critiqued. I did not ask about the hand sanitizer. I did not ask him to go on a FaceTime date with me. Somewhere in there, I thanked him for his leadership. I may have blacked out. Help, I think I hate... that was the end of her quote. Help, I think I hate Rebecca Fishbein, which is the author of the article, saying, I'm sure that's unfair. She's probably a lovely person who is struggling at this terrible moment, as we all are. I'm at a loss at times for how to convince people that the world is real, that prisoners like Michael are not abstractions but human beings, that a public official is not your daddy in any sense of the word, no matter how cutely you couch it. Fishbein is hardly the only culprit here. In Vogue, Molly Young Fast bravely answers the question few outside the media were asking: why we are crushing on Andrew Cuomo. She begins, as Fishbein does, by acknowledging a few of Cuomo's notoriously shitty actions as governor. I will have a lot more to say about this in a bit, but her criticisms are primarily aesthetic. She doesn't mention the prisoners and the hand sanitizer at all. Her problem with Cuomo is mostly that he just didn't speak to me, or rather, he spoke to me in a gruff, gravelly, overly empathetic, and slightly obnoxious way about obscure bureaucratic infighting. He felt joyless, not exciting. I liked him, but I didn't like him. He was no Sherrod Brown, no Chris Murphy, no Val Deming, no Tammy Duckworth. Oh, for the sizzling sex appeal of Sherrod Brown? But rather than thinking about what it means to like a politician and why that matters, Young Fast admits that thanks to the coronavirus crisis, she's fallen for our governor. She gushes. Andrew Cuomo may be imperfect, but he's still the closest thing we have to an FDR for our time, which is absurd because Franklin Delano Roosevelt did the New Deal, and did all kinds of things to give poor and middle class people of all races like money to better, and it built the biggest middle class to ever exist. If it wasn't for that, it would have never happened. Anyway, and then authorizing private entities to make supplies for World War II. So using the Production Act or whatever to compel businesses to make things that were necessary, like we need to do now, and we're not doing, or Trump's not doing, or he's only doing it if they, if the government gives them money, like GM, like they got a $500 million contract to make masks. No, motherfuckers, you profit off making crappy cars that aren't fuel efficient. Yeah, you could make some masks right now and take a break. Maybe we'll pay your workers to do so, or help you pay your workers, but you need to make this for us. It's not a question. It's not a profiteering thing. It's not supposed to be. But she says, again, when it comes to the internment camps, this may be actually a fair comparison. Like saying Andrew Cuomo is like FDR. So that is something shitty FDR did. And FDR did shitty things like every president, but he did a lot of great things. His wife pushed him, Eleanor Roosevelt, but that's, more history I'm not going to get into right now. Anyway, Young Fast also admits her jealousy for Fishbein, who actually got to talk to Cuomo on the phone. He was my competent governor, imaginary boyfriend, she whines. In case you were beginning to wonder, yes, both Fishbein and Young Fast are adult women. Listen, I'm as stupidly horny as the next idiot and totally agree that sexual attraction is subjective, even random. I love that line. She's a great writer. It's funny. Gives you a little break. Listen, I'm as stupidly horny as the next idiot and totally agree that sexual attraction is subjective, even random. This pandemic is a living nightmare, and a certain amount of silly eroticism is necessary and even expected when faced with invisible death particles that could kill us at any moment. But no amount of manufactured sexual consent will ever get me to agree that Andrew Cuomo is either physically attractive or worthy of respect. As my friend Jason Adam Katzenstein puts it, Cuomo has the vibe of a featured extra on Entourage who looked directly into the Ark of the Covenant. Looks are rarely indicative of character, but Cuomo happens to be both ugly and mean. And in his case, he's ugly because his face contorts into mean expressions, and he makes mean expressions because he's a mean person. Young Fast was right to label him joyless and obnoxious, but she missed the reasons why she used to feel this way. It's because Andrew Cuomo was a jerk and he sucks. Andrew Cuomo is a garbage person. I made a second video, or made a first video with the part one of this video and some of part two on my birthday and Earth Day. I never ended up releasing it, and again I'm going to release it just for patrons as extra content. I'm going to do that later. The text is an update from like a New Jersey environmental organization or something. Anyway, I couldn't wait to get to this. Andrew Cuomo is a garbage person. I only got to read some of it. Some New Yorkers remember this, some don't. Some have happily put their intelligence aside because our brains are full of the gibbering specter of death right now, and it's a lot easier to think with our collective junk. As Bronx-based comedian Deuce Nice tweeted with uncharacteristic irritation, Cuomo is trash, and you people are going to get a hard-on from these pressers and make him president one day because you're all stupid. Governor Cuomo has long harbored presidential ambitions, and last year he threatened to run for president if close ally Joe Biden didn't. Given Biden's likely victory and manifest unfitness for the presidency, there is some hope and speculation that Cuomo, among others, might be proffered by the Democratic National Committee in Biden's place, when obviously it should be Bernie Sanders, the second most votes, and that's even with it stolen. And Bernie Sanders, I think, won. Anyway, or was winning right now. Or closer, way closer to it, that's for sure. Anyway, weirder things have happened, and with the global pandemic hitting during an election year, we are officially in chaos mode. To Rebecca Fishbein's credit, she has taken ownership of her role in Cuomo's recent popularization and has said, I feel like I have helped create a monster, but Cuomo should not run for president, and I spent like 99% of my professional career writing about how much he sucks. But why is Andrew Cuomo such trash? Why shouldn't he run for president? What has he done that our thirsty, shameless, pants-off press is so quick to forget? A short list. Here's your short list. Andrew Cuomo is a liar and effectively a Republican. When Cuomo was first inaugurated in 2011, he was supposedly stymied by a difficult, intractable Republican state Senate. Technically, the New York Senate was majority Democratic, but a group of conservative Democrats known as the Independent Democratic Conference, or IDC, broke away to caucus with the Republicans, essentially becoming Republicans in all but name. So basically, they acted like conservative Democrats everywhere, only this time they were super obvious about it. You might be familiar with one of the IDC's chief strategists, Liz Smith, top advisor for the failed Buttigieg campaign. For his part, Cuomo claims he had nothing to do with the IDC. This is a lie. According to sources cited in a Politico report, Cuomo and his staff were active in nudging the IDC along behind the scenes. The sources also claim that Cuomo wanted to ensure that Republicans had control over the agenda in the Senate so that he wouldn't be handing over power to New York City Democrats. As Edward Isaac Dovier writes in a mostly flattering Atlantic profile, Cuomo maneuvered to support that breakaway group of Democrats in the state Senate so that he wouldn't get boxed into a more liberal agenda that he didn't want, which Cuomo denied in words while acting in ways that helped them directly and indirectly. When asked about the IDC, Cuomo still pretends he had nothing to do with them. He defines himself as a progressive, and specifically as an effective progressive, a competent progressive, an accomplished progressive. Progressive not just in words, progressive in actions. Now, progressive is a slippery term with many meanings, but I don't think letting Republicans do whatever they want while pretending you would pass legislation that would save people's lives, if only you could, is any kind of progress. Andrew Cuomo doesn't give a shit about gay people. In one of his often touted accomplishments, Andrew Cuomo legalized gay marriage in New York State in 2011. As per the Atlantic profile, the bill had long been sponsored by openly gay Congressman Danny O'Donnell, but Cuomo wanted it to be sponsored by his team instead. According to O'Donnell, Cuomo's chief of staff threatened him over O'Donnell's unwillingness to give up the bill. "You'll never work again," the chief of staff is reported to have said. "I'll make it my mission in life to destroy you." In the end, O'Donnell surrendered the marriage equality bill he'd been fighting to pass for over a decade, while Cuomo signed it and was acclaimed an LGBTQ rights champion. O'Donnell told Dovier, "It's only about getting Cuomo credit. He only cares about credit." Sounds like Donald Trump. So I'm saying in my last video, part one of this video, when I read a different article and critique him, and talk about Bernie Sanders and a bunch of other issues and Joe Biden and critique them, and I talked about a whole bunch of things. Capitalism and why it sucks. So definitely watch part one. Anyway, Cuomo is essentially Trump with a D in front of his name, and he's just more competent. The Human Rights Campaign, or HRC, among other LGBTQ organizations, endorsed Cuomo's gubernatorial re-election campaigns, and the HRC made him a speaker at their 2019 New York Gala. The organization has a talent for supporting powerful people over the interests of actual LGBTQ people. See here and here. There's links. I don't have time to go through them, unfortunately. Pramila Jayapal, a left-leaning congressman from Washington and the sponsor of the Medicare for All bill in the House, says that most of Cuomo's progressive accomplishments, such as gay marriage, are what New York's big donors want anyway. It's pretty obvious that you're not progressive if you're bullying gay politicians into letting you take credit for their work, and only doing the work in the first place because the local rich people said you could. And by the way, the links that I'm saying in this article that go to other articles that provide evidence, you could totally go check that out yourself. I'm going to put a link to the article, as I almost always have done, except for one or two videos I messed up and forgot. I'm going to put a link to this article at the bottom, in the top, in the description before I describe what I'm talking about. Andrew Cuomo doesn't give a shit about women or reproductive justice. With the help of the IDC, the Republican-controlled state Senate shot down critical reproductive health initiatives for years. To be fair to the IDC, their members sometimes claimed to support critical legislation, such as the Reproductive Health Act, RHA, and the Comprehensive Contraception Coverage Act, but the bills stalled because of opposition from the Republicans who control the chamber through an alliance with the IDC. Politics. What can you do? This, by the way, didn't stop the IDC from stealing reproductive justice valor in 2017 when they issued mailers claiming that Planned Parenthood endorsed several IDC candidates. This was a lie, and Planned Parenthood had to tell them to stop. Shortly after the IDC's defeat in the 2018 midterms, Cuomo signed both reproductive health bills into law, and you guessed it, proudly took credit, while simultaneously reassuring conservatives that the RHA does little more than codify Roe v. Wade into state law. At the signing ceremony for the RHA, Cuomo wore a pink tie and gave an award to Sarah Weddington, the lawyer who argued the Roe case before the Supreme Court. Politico quotes her as saying, with irony, the governor's tie indicates the depth of his sincerity. But wait, there's more. Andrew Cuomo really does not give a fuck about women. Cuomo was supported in his gubernatorial re-election campaigns, the first against attorney and activist Zephyr Teachout in 2014, the second against actress and activist Cynthia Nixon in 2018, by the Women's Equality Party. Wow, you might think, the Women's Equality Party supported Andrew Cuomo against two women candidates? He must be great on women's issues. You would be wrong. The Women's Equality Party, or WEP, supports Cuomo because he founded them in 2014 when he was running against Zephyr Teachout. As Gina Belafonte reports in a blistering New York Times article, the Women's Equality Party is something like a political shell company that has a history of endorsing more conservative male candidates over left-leaning female candidates. During the 2014 election, Belafonte tells us Mr. Cuomo drove around the state in a bus called the Women's Equality Express, which had a pink stripe adorning its side. Some found the entire enterprise craven and patronizing, and an obvious effort to peel off votes from the WFP, or Working Families Party, which had been fighting for paid sick leave and other causes vital to women's lives for many years. Others found it duplicitous, given the rampant culture of sexual harassment that has been permitted to fester for so long in the state capitol. The pink stripe on the bus indicates the depth of Cuomo's sincerity. Andrew Cuomo doesn't care about the people of Queens. When Amazon flirted with headquartering itself in Queens, Cuomo bowed and scraped in order to get their business. He even jokingly offered to change his name to Amazon Cuomo in exchange for the new headquarters. While Amazon promised the creation of 25,000 new jobs, they would pretty much all have been white-collar jobs offered mainly to educated out-of-staters and not the immigrant working-class residents of most of Queens. The mega corporation would also have been granted an obscene $3 billion in tax breaks for just designing to destroy the borough. For deigning to destroy the borough. Thankfully, local activists in alliance with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other New York Democrats tanked the Amazon deal and saved Queens. In typical Cuomo fashion, he loudly blamed the small group of politicians who put their own narrow political interests above their community, and then got sneaky, contacting Jeff Bezos directly to beg Amazon to reconsider. When it comes to kinks, to each their own, but personally, I can't imagine anything less sexually appealing than a public official who once begged the richest man on earth for table scraps. A few months ago, Amazon decided it would move into Manhattan's ritzy Hudson Yards neighborhood anyway without needing to be bribed by tax breaks first, just as AOC predicted would happen. Queens is safe, and the most annoying neighborhood in Manhattan is getting another corporate headquarters, all despite Andrew Cuomo's best efforts. Andrew Cuomo doesn't take leftist ideals seriously, and he doesn't like to do things that might be hard. If you're looking for Cuomo's other accomplishments, they might seem so unimpressive on the surface. He worked with Bernie Sanders to help bring a $15 minimum wage and paid family leave to New York, along with means-tested free public college. As Cuomo boasts, Bernie Sanders wants free college tuition, did it. $15 minimum wage, did it. I did almost everything they're talking about. Think about it. What are they talking about as a progressive ideal that we haven't done? More infrastructure and development than anyone? Did it. I'm sure he didn't do it with green technology or efficiently, like he should have, and like we should with all of our future, all of our future infrastructure bills at the federal level and in states. The problem is that Cuomo's progressive commitments are minimal at best. He favors policies that he believes are doable, but not the ones he's already decided can't be done. As Politico reports, Cuomo has rejected several fashionable progressive ideas that have come up in the primary as unrealistic and unworkable for the state overall. He has resisted further income tax hikes, in part because the rich are already leaving the state. Medicare for all wouldn't be possible on a state level, he argues. There are single-payer healthcare proposals in the state legislature, but the governor and state lawmakers haven't seriously considered the costs and upheaval that would follow. Cuomo received a hero's welcome for the $15 minimum wage bill, but he isn't willing to stick his neck out on anything difficult or really meaningful, especially not if it scares off rich people. He blames his blinkered imagination and lack of political courage on voters themselves. As Dovere writes, Democrats, Cuomo says, still don't get it. Voters across America don't want bold policy proposals. They want money in their pockets and worries off their plates. This is factually incorrect. Polls show that a majority of voters actually favor bold policy proposals such as Medicare for All and a Green New Deal, and public opinion may shift even further given the twin realities of the pandemic and subsequent economic collapse. But in praising Joe Biden, who opposes both Medicare for All and a Green New Deal, Cuomo mocks leftist ideas. Biden knows what he's talking about. He's experienced. He is relatable. He knows how to get things done. He wants to gets things done. He's not blowing smoke. He's not a blue sky puffer. He's not. Healthcare for all, Social Security for all, everything for all. Ah, yes, that impossible pie in the sky ambition of everyone having Social Security. I love this article. Andrew Cuomo is a constant thief of progressive valor. In fact, Cuomo is only willing to undertake bold policy as long as someone else does the difficult work of popularizing it first. Jay Appel describes Cuomo as a politician's politician. He is not a movement politician. He is not the person who comes up with the bold ideas first and does the work to push it forward. You can be a politician's politician and tough to move on an issue until you see a public out there that's clamoring. You still deserve credit for getting it done. But where were you when an issue was not popular? We could see the proof of this in Cuomo's reaction to Cynthia Nixon, his 2018 leftist primary challenger. During the primary, Cuomo moved left to fend off Nixon's candidacy. Once he won, many of her policies made their way into his new justice agenda, including legalizing marijuana, the above-mentioned Reproductive Health Act, a Green New Deal for New York State, a middle-class tax cut, and banning corporate campaign contributions. When Cuomo released the proposals in December 2018, he compared himself to FDR and said now is the time to lead. No, Bernie Sanders is like FDR, not. That's ridiculous. They've said this numerous times in this article. Anyway, Nixon has noted with amusement that she successfully pushed Cuomo left, but he's failed to acknowledge her influence on his agenda. In fact, in a recent press conference, he took an unnecessary shot at her, laughing at the very idea of her, a former actress who starred in a show about sex, as governor of New York during the coronavirus crisis. Andrew Cuomo is a cynic who stole a woman candidate's work and took the credit for it. If you were mad about Bernie offering further left versions of Warren's plans, though the analogy doesn't quite hold, given that Cuomo would never have adopted left policies without Nixon pressuring him, the comparison here should really be to Sanders pressuring Clinton in 2016. Then Cuomo is the guy you should really hate. Andrew Cuomo believes in nothing except his own legacy and making sure rich people keep their money. If you ask Cuomo, however, he'll insist on his progressive credentials. When his record is criticized, he blames the professional left, whom he describes as members of the greatest scam in history. What does it mean, professional left? Basically a sham set of groups that are fronts for labor unions that were all with Cynthia Nixon, the professional left. When he isn't calling labor unions and leftist scammers, he's accusing them of being contrarians who lack the necessary pragmatism. Quoted in New York Magazine, the governor said, Mario Cuomo was never liberal enough. Koch was never liberal enough. Obama wasn't liberal enough. Should have been single payer. He's a sellout, Cuomo says sarcastically. There is an institutional far left who's always contrary left. You're going to have to beat Trump with an authentic, reality-based alternative who says we can do this. In a similar vein, pollster and Albany insider Steve Greenberg described Cuomo's appeal to Politico as a progressive who gets things done. But what does it really mean to get things done? Are progressive policies, as Cuomo has claimed on multiple occasions, really at risk of driving a significant number of rich people out of the state? There is some evidence that rich people are leaving New York, but even Forbes admits that the problem is as much costly living expenses and crumbling infrastructure as the tax rate. The real obstacle to progressive policies in New York, according to Bill Lipton, executive director of the Working Families Party, is Andrew Cuomo. I tried to work with the guy for 8 years because we're the WFP. We're not the Green Party. We're trying to actually get stuff done. The truth is Cuomo has no policy or values base at all. What he cares about is keeping taxes low on his donors. In a 2015 New Yorker profile of Andrew Cuomo, the WFP's national director said Cuomo is not some kind of progressive. He rejects the view that the middle class in America was built by unions pushing up and the progressive income tax pushing down. His attitude is we have to keep rich people happy. It's trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics is an epic failure throughout history, and it's why our country is in such terrible shape and has been for a long time, and it's why the coronavirus is highlighting all of these inequities and poor lack of government action on vital issues to the survival of democracy, to the survival of the human race, to have people having a good life, to having actual freedom and democracy. Anyway, Andrew Cuomo is beholden to rich people. The source of Cuomo's petty feud with the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is not, as most people think, the New York City subway. The badly needed subway upgrades were definitely a source of tension. Cuomo argued that the city owned the subway and that Mayor Bill de Blasio needed to pay for half of the repairs. De Blasio pinned the blame on the Metropolitan Transit Authority, a state agency controlled for all practical purposes by Cuomo. But the battle may also have been over de Blasio's universal pre-kindergarten plan, which is paid for by a millionaire's tax on the richest residents in the state. Cuomo, according to a former advisor quoted in New York Magazine, was furious about the tax. He told the mayor, "We're going to give you pre-K. It may take a while. We may have to bang you around a little bit, but you're getting pre-K. Now understand my politics, Bill. I just fought off this millionaire's tax. I need the business community right now because I've got to get an on-time budget." De Blasio partly agrees with the interpretation of events, saying, "I was struck by Cuomo's unwillingness to tax the wealthy, and I felt he was not willing to challenge some powerful interests in the state." However, de Blasio added that the deeper issue was Cuomo's support for the IDC and the Republicans, saying Cuomo broke the promise he made to help us win a Democratic state Senate, and over the years he aided and abetted the IDC and Republicans, and that to me was a real breaking point. Now, don't get me wrong, Bill de Blasio sucks and has generally been a disappointing and ineffective mayor, but Cuomo is, by his own team's admission, at least partly responsible for the feud, since he was reluctant to tax his wealthy donors. Also, when New York Magazine reporter Chris Smith asked Cuomo if maybe he would be better off not punching at the mayor, Cuomo snapped forward in his chair. "He started with me first." Andrew Cuomo is not only beholden to rich people, but he is also possibly a literal child. Behavior like Donald Trump. In fact, Andrew Cuomo isn't just beholden to rich people, he's outright been bought. The matter of LLCs came up a lot during the primary against Nixon. In New York State, LLCs are a method that corporate entities use to launder their campaign contributions, somewhat like super PACs. New York Magazine states that Cuomo takes in money from corporate, hedge fund, and real estate interests, and quotes a Cuomo insider who said, "Why raise $31 million? And by the way, at a real cost in terms of time and energy, and at a political cost because it makes you king of the LLC." The governor is acutely aware that it's not just about the dollars to spend. It's the perception. You want to run against me? You better be prepared. And it says to the world, I have access to really deep pockets. During the primary, Cynthia Nixon refused to raise money from LLCs and lost the election to her better-funded opponent. Andrew Cuomo takes money from rich people, sneers at principled rivals, says taxes on rich people aren't politically possible, and then implements left policies only if he can get rich people to approve them first. What a progressive hero. Andrew Cuomo is a craven showman. Let's talk about the bridge, because it's my favorite Cuomo story, just like the murdered groundhog is my favorite de Blasio story. Shortly before the 2018 primary election, the old Tappan Zee Bridge, which had been falling apart for years, was replaced with an updated bridge built very close by. Andrew Cuomo wanted to name the new edifice the Mario M. Cuomo Bridge after his famous governor father, but voters objected and the bridge ended up being dual-named, clumsily, the Mario M. Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge. I've never heard anyone call it anything other than the Tappan Zee or maybe the new Tappan Zee. Chris Cuomo, Andrew's brother and a CNN anchor, said that their modest father would have liked the bridge but would not have liked having it named after him. Andrew agreed but kept the name. He bragged about the accomplishment. They've been talking about doing these things for so long, since I was a kid, and it was always everything's complicated, the Tappan Zee Bridge. Well, the federal government, well, the local, well, the state, we're actually doing it. However, there were allegations of faulty bolts on the new bridge, as well as a potential cover-up of its dangers and unreadiness. The new bridge was supposed to be completed on August 24th, and a report states that the Cuomo administration offered sweeteners to Tappan Zee constructors to complete the bridge in time. Finally, in early September, the new bridge was finally allegedly ready. Cuomo hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony on September 7th, a mere week before the New York primary on September 13th. Almost immediately after the ceremony, however, parts of the new bridge had to be shut down due to fears that the old Tappan Zee would collapse on top of it. Instead of being safe and gradually disassembled, the old bridge was blown up to protect the new one. Cuomo's spokespeople denied that the opening had been rushed in order to happen before Election Day. Cynthia Nixon remarked, "A ribbon-cutting ceremony should not have been held if the bridge span was not safe yet." Cuomo's press secretary responded to this criticism and others with the following statement. "The Mario M. Cuomo Bridge is complete and ready for traffic, and the action taken by TPZ Construction, given the potential issue on the old structure, was out of an abundance of caution and public safety, not politics. Anyone trying to score political points off it only underscores why they are unfit to serve. The bridge incident was definitely not a stunt, and there was nothing to see here, folks. Andrew Cuomo isn't governor of New York because he earned it. Some fair meritocratic... No, excuse me. Andrew Cuomo isn't governor of New York because he earned it in some meritocratic contest. He's governor of New York because Mario Cuomo was his father. The matter of Andrew's relationship to his father's legacy comes up a lot. Mario M. Cuomo was a mostly beloved governor himself and in many respects an actual progressive. Andrew often decries the psychodrama that gets read into every mention of his father. In the 2018 primary, DeVere writes, Andrew Cuomo won more votes, as he and his staff eagerly point out, and then point out again, than anybody else in the history of New York. You will note that anyone else in this case includes both Franklin D. Roosevelt and Mario Cuomo, his father, and role model, and a constant reference point. As the New Yorker reports, Cuomo often uses the same phrase to dismiss comparisons between him and his father. As he put it in his eulogy for Mario, over the years the press would love to give their dime store psychoanalysis of our quote-unquote complex father and son relationship, which was all a lot of hooey. I don't know about hooey, but at the risk of reading in psychodrama, Andrew Cuomo's I'm not locked in a lifelong Oedipal struggle with my dead father's legacy t-shirt has people asking a lot of questions already answered by his shirt. Andrew and his brother Chris recently had a contentious exchange about their parents on CNN, which Young Fast called relatable and delightfully normal. I still can't tell if it was scripted or not, but either way, it just felt tense. Regardless, Andrew Cuomo had a job in politics, and his brother a job at CNN, because their dad was Mario Cuomo, and for little other reason. You might argue that Andrew did work for Mario for years, gaining appropriate experience. That's nice, if only we all had Governor Daddies to work for. Andrew Cuomo was an asshole. Yup. Here's a list of things people have said about Andrew Cuomo and profile pieces ranging from the sympathetic to the fawning to the respectfully critical at worst. What comes up most in talking about Cuomo is how people hate him, The Atlantic. The difference between the Cuomos are huge. Mario would blow up in a rage, while Andrew tends to bide his time for revenge, The Atlantic. Even when there is good news, Cuomo's scheming breeds suspicion from reporters, activists, and other politicians, The Atlantic. Is he a son of a bitch at times? Yeah. New York Magazine. And when he's criticized, his first reaction, often deployed through surrogates or staffers, is to belittle or intimidate, New York Magazine. Andrew is vindictive, a Democratic strategist says. He wants to punish people, and he gets joy out of that, New York Magazine. A hands-on manager who prefers vice grip control, Politico. One Northeast-based political consultant, a longtime fixture at the National Governors Association event, says he remembered meeting in previous years when Cuomo entered and exited sessions without a word to anyone. When Cuomo does publicly interact with other governors, the events are often carefully timed and monitored on his own home turf, Politico. A governor who finds it distasteful to interact with the unpredictable masses and his fellow politicians, Politico. It's sometimes said of certain politicians that they love humanity but hate people. Andrew Cuomo does not appear especially fond of either. He is the uncommon elected official with a streak of misanthropy. Cuomo rarely sees ordinary people, and they rarely see him except in televised commercials. Andrew doesn't like meeting with voters. Someone who is familiar with the campaign told me. He'll do parades, but that's about it, The New Yorker. But what about coronavirus? Okay, fine, so Cuomo's record is often bad. So he's a preening, self-aggrandizing, untrustworthy, unlikable, vindictive valor thief in the pocket of well-heeled donors. But what about the current crisis? Aren't the times so extraordinary that they require our memories to be shorter than even the usual goldfish span required of the Democratic rank and file? Isn't Andrew Cuomo handling this particular crisis well? Let's take a look. I've already brought up the whole slaves pretending to make hand sanitizer issue, but on top of that, only about 300 people have been released from New York's overcrowded jails and prisons, even as coronavirus rips through Rikers Island and other city jails. As of the time of this writing, over 100 people in the New York City prison system, both prisoners and guards, have been diagnosed, but the numbers are likely higher. As the Associated Press reports, New York officials have New York's officials have consistently downplayed the number of infections in its prisons and jails. Rather than release prisoners into safer environments, de Blasio has already released the 300 mentioned above, and may release more, but not enough. Cuomo has preferred to go ahead with his plan to reverse New York's recent bail reform measures. Editor's note: on the afternoon of March 27th, 2020, Cuomo finally decided to release 1,100 people locked up in New York State prisons for minor parole violations. And at Cuomo's Monday presser, he glommed into the conservative meme of human lives versus wealth creation. Oh, okay, it is human lives, sorry. And at Cuomo's Monday presser, he glommed onto the conservative meme of human lives versus wealth creation. Got to hear both sides, with a graphic that balanced protected lives with economic viability. If you're swooning over Cuomo's short-sleeved outfits while he's openly weighing the cost of killing workers, you might need therapy. But you might say, that's not the Cuomo I love. I love the Cuomo who went on TV and yelled at Trump, the Cuomo who wrote an op-ed in the New York Times demanding more hospital beds and medical supplies from the federal government. That was great. That's what leadership looks like. Well, if you're curious why New York will soon run out of hospital beds, it's not solely because of the huge number of COVID-19 victims. It's also because Cuomo has been closing down hospital spaces for years via his Burger Commission, which has sought efficiency in the name of budget cuts and insurance overhauls. This Cuomo-appointed panel just decided to cut Medicaid even further, including specific cuts to city hospitals. They didn't arrive at this decision pre-crisis, but literally last Thursday. It would have been evil at any time, but now, as a highly contagious virus cripples the city, it's unconscionable. Absolutely correct. Cuomo is probably the single most important person in terms of the drive to close down hospital beds in this state over the last 20 years, said Sean Petty of the New York State Nurses Association in a terrific interview with Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Is a great source of information. Petty continued, specifically because of policies that Governor Cuomo has pursued, we are now 20,000 beds behind where we need to be in terms of trying to scale up our capacity. A flattering U.S. News article titled How Coronavirus Made Andrew Cuomo America's Governor, an obvious reference to the way Rudy Giuliani was called America's mayor after 9/11, points out that in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, the governor has used New York's resources to buy personal protective equipment and expand hospital bed space. But does that actually mean anything, given that Cuomo trimmed the budget? Much like the quarantine buzz cuts everybody's been doing? Way too close in the first place? The fact is that Cuomo's past and currently suggested Medicaid cuts have put New York hospitals in a horrible position. Governor Cuomo is currently trying to reduce Medicaid spending in the state by almost $2.5 billion during this pandemic, Petty said, and this will absolutely result in a decrease in healthcare capacity and keep the state from getting matching federal dollars for Medicaid spending. That $2.5 billion figure is over several years. Cuomo aims to cut Medicaid by $400 million alone in 2020, in the middle of the worst pandemic the world has faced in 100 years. New York's ventilator shortage also seems to be in many ways the governor's fault. A 2015 report from his administration predicted that when faced with severe influenza or influenza-like pandemic, such as, say, the one that's upon us right now, New York would fall 15,783 ventilators short of the necessary amount. Cuomo's plan, according to documents dug up by journalist John Riley, was to allocate ventilators rather than just buy more to have in readiness. While the federal government has obviously done a poor job of supplying ventilators, medical supplies, and hospital beds to the most afflicted states, it doesn't help that Andrew Cuomo has been kneecapping New York hospitals and their workers during the decade he's been in charge. The governor's poor planning is the one reason New York hospitals are already overwhelmed, with healthcare workers at Mount Sinai West forced to wear trash bags due to lack of protective gear. Caius Kelly, a 48-year-old assistant nursing manager at Mount Sinai, died on Tuesday from coronavirus complications. Some of his co-workers blamed the hospital as an institution, while others said that the supply issues have been going on for some time. A nurse told the New York Post that within the last year, even before the coronavirus hit, we had to hide our own supplies and go to other units looking for stuff because the supply room would have nothing most of the time. While Cuomo obviously can't be held solely responsible for Mount Sinai's supply problems, his healthcare cuts certainly bear some of the blame. There also remains the open question of whether Cuomo's supposed best action, the stay-at-home order he issued, even happened in time. New York's coronavirus case numbers have been sky high. 100 people died on March 26th. Update as of 4/08/2020. 731 people died on April 7th, 2020. It's way worse now. Anyway, you could, of course, dispassionately argue that during a highly contagious global pandemic, we would expect that the largest and most densely populated city in any given country would have the most cases and the most fatalities. On March 12th, as coronavirus burned through New Rochelle, just north of the Bronx, the number of coronavirus cases in New York City jumped to 95, and de Blasio declared a state of emergency. I started self-quarantining. I work from home, so it's not much different than my regular life. But Cuomo only issued the stay-at-home order, closing all non-essential businesses throughout the state and encouraging people to stay indoors if they can on March 20th. The order didn't even go into effect until the 22nd, the same day as my terrifying grocery run. Update as of 4/08/2020. According to Dr. Thomas R. Frieden, former head of the CDC and also a former commissioner of the New York City Health Department, if the state and city had adopted widespread social distancing measures a week or two earlier, including closing schools, stores, and restaurants, then the estimated death toll from the outbreak might have been reduced by 50 to 80%. Wow. As it is, essential businesses in New York include not just grocery stores, but also construction workers building luxury apartments, which frequently go unsold anyway. Even the otherwise worshipful New York Times has some tepid words for Cuomo about his delay. The governor's actions have not always been at the forefront. He waited several days last week as the count of confirmed cases continues to rise. The governor's actions have not always been at the forefront. He waited several days last week as the count of confirmed cases continued to rise before instituting an order to close non-essential businesses and ask residents to stay at home, even as Governor Gavin Newsom of California had already done so. The Times pins the blame on Cuomo's legendary quarrel with de Blasio, saying that the question of issuing an order degenerated into a semantics debate. Was mid-pandemic the right time to have a stupid semantics debate with Bill de Blasio? I guess it depends on whether Cuomo felt like de Blasio started it first. Now let's be fair. There's plenty of reasons to blame both Cuomo and de Blasio, and to paraphrase the original Ghostbusters, treating public officials like dirt is every New Yorker's God-given right. It is notable that the recent flurry of distinctively un-New York hagiography over Cuomo has less to do with his actions, which have been decent at best and hideously cruel at worst, and more about his attitude. We hear a lot about his steady and calm leadership and his daily public updates that are assertive and reassuring, claiming and urgent. I don't want to dismiss the emotional significance of these daily briefings. They make people feel safer, and that really is important in these awful days. Journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones tweeted, "No matter what you think of his politics, Governor Andrew Cuomo is modeling crisis leadership right now. Fact-based, blunt, knowledgeable, firm, and calm. He is clear the responsibility lies with him, and that there is a plan, and that there will be a plan. No, there will be pain, but we must all share in it." While Trump has denied responsibility for the crisis, even though his personal inattentiveness and inaction are largely to blame for the unchecked scale of coronavirus spread, Cuomo has said, "I accept full responsibility. If someone is unhappy, if somebody wants to blame someone or complain about someone, blame me. There is no one else who is responsible for this decision." But the fact is that Cuomo hasn't taken responsibility for his many errors, and what's worse is that no one seems to care. In a sexually repressed but infinitely depraved piece from the New York Times called "Andrew Cuomo is the control freak we need right now," Ben Smith praises Cuomo's authoritarian strength. He comments admiringly on Cuomo's capacity to bend the bureaucracy to his will, and how, without inspiring much love, Cuomo wins elections by grinding opponents into dust before they can make it to the ballot box. He governs by transaction, not inspiration. As a dispenser of favors and destroyer of insurgents' dreams, the purest master of the machine since Lyndon Johnson in his prime. Piling scorn on Cuomo's enemies, Smith writes that the people most passionate about politics these days, the new left and the Trump-led right, dislike him because he governs as both a social liberal and a friend of business. Many moderate and liberal politicians who ought in theory to like Cuomo simply fear him. Smith, as is typical of the writers of these slavering essays, speaks more about Cuomo's leadership and his powerful presence than his actual actions. However, Smith does state, without inflection, that one of Cuomo's impressively decisive decisions during the coronavirus outbreak has been to put state prisoners to work making hand sanitizer. There's no judgment here, no mention of the condition of the prisoners or the prisons, no whisper of the fact that they aren't actually making the hand sanitizer in the first place, and definitely no use of the accurate phrase slave labor. Yet Ben Smith scorns the new left who fail to appreciate Cuomo, as though we are being unreasonable for wanting social and economic process, both at the same time, and also for thinking that human beings shouldn't be locked up in cages, especially during the outbreak of a killer virus. Are we greedy? Are we impractical? Do we fail to love Cuomo as he deserves? I might be accused, as leftists often are, of expecting politicians to be perfect. I don't. This is a horrible, unprecedented disaster that has stretched the flaws in our social fabric to the limit. And the governor of a U.S. state, if he were a good person, which Cuomo is not, would be able to magically save the lives of all his citizens or cancel the infection rate of this hideously contagious disease. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, however, does seem to be doing a fairly good job. And if you simply must lust after